Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that tonight's meeting is being recorded and transcribed. And uh, we have Becca and Lance here tonight. Becca, of course, with Renaissance. You all three have been seeing her throughout all of our events. Lance first joined the meeting on back in March. I can't remember. I think it's March 12th or something like that. Our very first introduction to the consultant team. Lance is with SP Friedman, and he's been doing the market piece, the market study and research, and furthering that market analysis to go along with Becca's work on the planning side. And with that, switch to the to tonight's agenda. See, our task force chairs are here tonight. I don't know if you all have any welcoming opening remarks you'd like to make before we get started, and hand the presenting over to Becca and Lance.
Nothing from me. I'm interested to hear our agenda for tonight and see the presentation. I don't have anything, but welcome all. Glad you're all here.
Just a note, on this Saturday, October 28th, is the opening of the Lorton Police Station and Animal Shelter. At 10 o'clock to 11, there will be remarks and officials there, and then from 11 to 2, they'll have games and so forth for the kids. Like there's food, snacks, a lot of different events. So, see everybody there. That's a big thing for this community. We've had the police station, the animal shelter, the fire station, this community center, the library, park improvement. They're continuing to be on.
Building momentum.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Anything else? Well, it's good to see you all again. I know that I can't remember if I saw any of you at the back to school event, but we definitely saw you at the open house, which already feels like a while ago. But yeah, so Lance is joining tonight from SB Friedman, and he's been engaged this whole time with SB Friedman. So we're here really not with a lot of new information, just kind of to summarize and officially move on to next steps. So do want to acknowledge that momentum has continued for this project. I know that it's been going on since 2018 and before that when it's been ideas, but I do want to congratulate you all that it hasn't ever stopped. And in planning, that is never a guarantee. So I think that in itself is a feat, that it's continuing to move. You have momentum of other things going on, and I think that's worth recognizing. So well done to all of you for the perseverance that you've had in this whole process, and the staff who have been here part of that. It's been a joy and an honor to be able to work alongside you guys for this process. So yeah, we're just hoping to kind of summarize what we've heard and what kind of the words that we've heard from you all into some visioning elements. So with that, we have just a reminder of some of the things that were foundational in this, and we've gone through this before. It's not new information, and just want to remind you that the vision statement that you all put together, that you approved together, is really the foundation for all of the presentation, the project, the amendment going forward. It forms the foundation for that. So all of those statements, well, this is not explicitly those because it was a 2-page document. This is some of the essence of that, wanting to see the land use and intensity and character develop around these specific nodes, wanting this multimodal transportation infrastructure, just talking to, some of the FCDOT folks, and wanting to see that happen, and that being a really transformational thing with this as well. Parks, recreational areas, and environmental areas through the community engagement. This is something that we really heard from a lot of people, is that they're okay with this development happening. They're okay with a greater intensity of housing, especially as long as that does bring, multimodal connectivity, and that it preserves the parks and enhances the ecological and, just open space assets that you will have. So those were some really key things that you guys had honed in on early on, and we just heard be confirmed in the outreach that we've done. So then kind of, defining the centers and the key features with this branding that reinforces this vision and the sense of unity. And so all the things that, Nick just mentioned of that are building, how can those all be cohesive and not just things that are kind of existing in their own little orbits? And I think what we've seen with this community center too is that it's doing what its namesake is, and it's really building community. So I think there's a lot to be working off of from there. This is the map that you've all seen before too. Something that's new though is kind of defining the actual core area here. So we talked about in the past, having these nodes, and these are the ones that have kind of the most significant redevelopment potential in the nearer future, and just kind of forming that core area. So the descriptions here, I'm not going to read them all. You can look at them and you'll receive this presentation, but they're in line with what we've already talked about, kind of the types of transformation that you want to see at each of these places. After this, I'll just go through each of these boards, and this information was available at the open house. And so a lot of it from that was just confirmed, and then we developed some renderings and illustrations from that. So the first one being Lorton Town Center, and obviously this is one that has already a really strong base, and a lot of what we heard, we've also talked to VDOT and heard the things that they're wanting to see with VRE stations, and that they're really wanting to see those be places where people actually, it's more transit oriented and people are actually using the station who are living nearby. And so they were also very supportive of housing here. And so the vision for this station is really just supporting what's already there with more housing to create a more vibrant area that is also connected to these other areas, as it's the location that's a little bit more buried, but with Lorton becoming more of a destination, an area that would much more easily be, known for people who are just driving by, rather than just driving by. If they're stopping, they're going to be able to see it. Moving on from here, Lorton Marketplace. So as node 2, this being kind of, a regional center, it's right in the crossroads. So something that we've talked about, and it's been the story of Lorton, is that you guys have these really important transportation assets. Places develop where people can reach them. And so this is a really important area because it's very easily accessible. And so when we think about, how development just kind of happens regularly where it wants to happen, you see this emergence of centers. And so Lorton has such great potential to emerge as one of these centers, and Lorton Marketplace is the area that kind of can bring a lot of that together. And so a really important area. Also knowing, though, that there is existing development already there. And so how can we kind of work in staging that? And so you can, I don't know if there's there is. This is the Amazon Fresh marketplace right now. And so it doesn't disrupt the footprint of that or even some of these existing buildings, but it does put, an additional road to improve connectivity here. And so there's opportunity for phasing this, and there's opportunities for parking garages to address parking. So, it's not something that will happen overnight, but again, it's something that we've talked about with the vision of what's possible here, and that there are great possibilities here, given especially its location. Moving on, Gunston Plaza, and there will be opportunities for comments and questions, but you've all seen these before, so I'll wait for that. But Gunston Plaza, also very important in equal measure for its transportation assets too, right along Richmond Highway, and the future BRT. And so even thinking about that and, things that would spur the kind of extension of the BRT line on in the future, this visioning effort and the, actual amendment of the comp plan is really important towards that end. And so I think, while sometimes it can feel far off, not to diminish the impact of a plan like this, and even just putting it out there that this is something that, yes, we actually want. And that's something that we heard repeated too from the community, that people moved here, for the VRE even. And so having a BRT is exciting to them. And so this station really is built with that in mind, and the highest building heights being those that are fronting Richmond Highway. And so, kind of stepping up, and so that when you're in the community, it still really feels like, it's this smaller town kind of Main Street feel, but stepping up to the back where you don't see it when you're standing at the front, you don't see it when you're in the neighborhoods over here, but over here where there's, not development right now, aside from the, the water treatment plant, you can have those higher heights to support some of this residentially. So activity notes 4 through 6, I didn't put slides for each one because we've talked about this again, but the Civic Center where we're standing now has clearly become a hub and a place for a lot of activity. And so building on that, connecting this to these other places, we've outlined some key opportunities for residential development and the opportunity if that gets redeveloped, of improving connectivity between the nodes since they're so close together. And so all of that is outlined in the plan. And we know that, there's some challenges with staying that, and there will be steps towards talking to all of the land owners in that, but identified really important areas to improve that connectivity and outlined some vision elements for that. The Richmond Highway Industrial right now, you all know it's a lot of kind of storage and not really high employment uses. So this envisions it as more of an employment center because part of the vision too, and thinking about, where are you living, where are you working, is that, the ideal for all of us is that our work is not too far from where we live. And so as we, invite more people to live here, we also have to think about where are they working. And so this is a really good opportunity to look at that flex space, to look at higher uses for this area that would draw some employment that people hopefully living here would be able to take advantage of. And then finally, South Lorton, where there already is some employment, how do we create that into a space that, yes, is connected over or under 95 rather, that already has some of that connected to the assets that are, building momentum and the rest of, Lorton too on the other side, the Workhouse Arts Center and even the potential Alpine X Park, everything going on over there. How do we kind of build those connections? So that is the high level of what is the kind of the feel of the vision. And we have these numbers that we had presented in the past too. So these have not changed, at least in any significant. There might be, 5s or 10s at the ends that have been rounded, but these have not changed significantly. Looking at residential and non-residential potential for the future, both in dwelling units and then square feet. And so this is, we'll talk about it later, but these things are now all going through and getting vetted by the other county departments to kind of say, okay, if this is what you're planning for, if this is what you want, what else do we need to support that? How can we, make this vision happen, or where might there be sticking points? So those are conversations that are happening as well. With all of this now, we talked about all the vision, an important thing, especially, in going around to developers and having people actually see, okay, we hear the words, but what kind of places do you actually want this to look like? We've developed some character illustrations, and it's important to know that these are just character. They're not final, this is not a promise of any developer coming in and actually doing this. The developers have say in that, obviously, but these are supposed to be inspirational. And based off of the vision that we have heard from you all. And so there's 3 that have been developed that we'll kind of go through. So the first is a view of the commercial mixed-use street in Lorton Marketplace, just kind of showing, what does one of these internal streets look like? What does it look like to have a street that's not oriented only to cars, where cars, yes, can travel, but they're not, the main one of the show, that there's other people who feel comfortable getting around. A view of the common green space in Gunston Plaza. So another thing that we have talked about and we've heard, there's all this great parkland around, there's great open space, but what does it look like to actually incorporate that within the development? And so having more places that are like where we're at right now, that actually draw community, that feel like places that people want to be, that draw folks. And so that's something that, we heard too that was missing from when the town center developed, that it was this place, but it didn't necessarily gather people as informally. And then a view of the mixed-use development along Richmond Highway being the center, bringing in transportation and your kind of highest density of development there. So these 3, the this is the first rendering. There's a really small box that I try to show to remind you what we're looking at. So this is the commercial street in Lorton Marketplace, looking at these buildings that can step down. There's variation in the types of the buildings. There's more safety for pedestrians, feeling like they can actually be there. Variations in setbacks of the buildings, trees. We know that's a point of comfort that's missing in a lot of the areas here as well, and a place that just feels more active. And so this is the scale that we're looking at that still feels very human scale, but offers some more of that potential for liveliness. So this is that first one. The second one is a common green. And this could be, any number of things. This is just a character illustration, but an important feature of this too is that while it is in the middle and there's streets that go here and here, the way that it could be developed is such that the streets with, using this similar paving material, it feels like it's all more of one. And so that just naturally encourages cars to go a little slower. It encourages them to see, oh, this is a shared space that we all have, rather than this is only my space and a pedestrian is in the way if they're here at all. So some potentials for that, different park space, places that can be activated in different ways, still parking, still street parking, well lit. So all of these elements that go into creating a place.
I could real quick do a question.
Oh.
Can you orient us towards Lorton Road? So I think the answer is that this is looking southeast.
Let me go back.
It would be behind, but
Oops.
okay.
Okay, so it's as if we're standing here looking towards Richmond Highway.
Thank you.
Yeah. So each of these, like this is your point, and this is everything kind of in this triangle is what you see. Okay, yeah, so it being over here, Richmond Highway. And then Richmond Highway, so this is where we have our more intense or higher building heights, more intense uses. The kind of plans and renderings that are already existing for the Richmond BRT further north along the route show a center running. So we stayed with that same the same center running, including more street trees, prioritizing bikes. This rendering is just one possibility, but showing a cycle track along the side rather than having lanes on both sides, because it takes up a little less space for that. And there's, the intensity of development is really along this side, so it helps turning movements as well. So just one potential view of what this could look like, prioritizing, different modes of transportation, while also saying what kind of development would there, how do you support that transit? And, you need people who are going to ride it. So that's where this density of buildings comes from. Those are the character illustrations. And, the character can be great, but how are we getting to the places? If you have a great place, but no one can get to it, what does that matter? So we've talked to you all and the community about, how do you want these places to connect? And a lot of this isn't, it's not new either, but looking at within, each of these activity nodes especially, and the connections are important as you go down, but these are zoomed in because it's, we're looking at, a heightened importance within this core area of really the multimodal connections. And so looking at, improving connectivity with the neighborhoods that are already there. We're not, we didn't show the development or the intensity of development on some of the existing neighborhoods, but we're saying as and if it gets developed, we'd like to see greater connectivity there, making sure to connect into the neighborhoods that exist around, knowing that, some are HOAs right now and there's different challenges in doing that, but setting forth that as the vision. So this is primarily street connectivity with having, the potential BRT station locations and putting those strategically where there's going to be the greatest chance of heavy ridership. Then looking over here at the green and blue connectivity, so that just being, with water and with trails, looking at the trails that already exist. If we zoomed out a little bit, you'd see how this connects to some of the trails that exist in the, outer parts of Lorton, to the west side and to the south to some of the parks down there. But also knowing that there's a real importance that we heard from everyone really about increasing the safety and the feel within Lorton as well. And so all of these things really are saying Lorton is no longer a place that you just pass through. This is not just for cars going at high speeds, acknowledging, that it'll mean slower speeds, but it'll mean safer feelings for everyone, or more safety for everyone involved, including cars, honestly. So from here, we have, this is kind of the scaled out aerial view, and we've gone in and shown typical just character illustrations again of what some of these typical cross sections of these streets could look like. So again, I'm using the word could because it's not a guarantee, but hearing what you all have said, what your priorities are for the modes that get prioritized, we have developed some of these illustrations looking at the existing right-of-ways, how much space between buildings do you have to work with, and what could happen in those spaces. And so this one is showing a typical interior street. So everywhere that there's an F on the screen is something that would be, they're not all exactly the same right of way, but they'll be similar. And so what could you expect there? And really just two lanes of traffic for travel, sidewalk areas buffered by street trees. Then we have the typical street section for Richmond Highway. And this is showing these two lanes right here would be the center running bus. Over here we have a cycle track. Anytime that it's buffered and has both lanes in one area, we call that a cycle track. So that's what's happening over here. And then buildings not until this edge over here with also a sidewalk over here, and the existing, not changing the existing the trail that's already on the other side of Richmond Highway. So Lorton Avenue, there's a few options that we actually illustrated for Lorton Avenue. Again, looking at a potential for a cycle track just for the volume of the street and the size. So the right of way here, this would be kind of this where B is starting to lose its juice.
Lorton Road, right?
Yes. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
Both of these have been updated and they're wrong here. So Lorton Road showing, yeah, my pointer is now dying, but it's B. So it's along this area here, which I fear that this might die altogether, but I'll just watch my computer if that happens. Showing 2 lanes of traffic, so reducing a lane of traffic, but what you get is some potential for on-street parking in some areas. You get more space for pedestrians and a cycle track. And so this is accomplished through just narrowing some of the lanes that already exist. So it's not even, because the lanes are pretty wide as they stand right now. They're quite wide, which is another thing that encourages really fast speed. Because if you don't have to pay attention, then you can just fly. So
I can explain again what that cycle track is again. Cycle track is.
You have a width on that or?
on the cycle track?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So 10 feet.
10 feet.
Mm-hmm. I hope I didn't mix up the batteries. Or else those batteries just don't work. Okay. This computer.
I think I have the, if you can tell me next slide.
Okay.
And I have a mouse.
Did you get it?
Got it.
What are they doing?
I mean, it's hard to present also.
Okay. Oh, I advanced it. So yeah, the cycle track is here and that's 10 feet. So often when you have a bike lane, you know, you have to have 5 feet and then you buffer it with traffic. Not always, as we see out here, but when that's the case, you know, our transportation planners and anyone who rides a bike out there, aside from Christine, who I worry about, has a level of fear of riding right next to cars that are, you know, it's not safe.
So is this a sidewalk as well as a cycle track?
This is the sidewalk right here. Yeah. And there's a sidewalk over.
Is there a place that you've seen that in operation?
Yeah, yeah.
So that it's something where we can look at it and,
Yep.
and translate it to our,
Mhm.
our situation?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
There are a lot of examples in DC. I know DC is DC, but they have actually, even in, I live in Capitol Hill, and in East Capitol Hill, there has been very recently a lot of roads that are getting these cycle tracks because it condenses the space that you need, and it works on one-way streets as well. So that's another thing that, you know, a lot of cities are doing, is where, you know, there's a one-way street, and you don't have those here, but it offers just a lot more safety for a biker and connectivity. So if, you know, cars have to go one way, bikes don't always. But yeah, so there's plenty of precedents for that in the images that are available and experiences that you guys could take a field trip and go see. So another opportunity, and there are images of these in the final report that we have put together. This will be kind of explained as part of the next steps, but we have more of these images of real life pictures of what these places can look like. These are the renderings of the actual. So this one, you really can't tell from the aerial, but what this does is it puts parallel parking in the middle of the road. And so this would be only for this section. And what it does is creates a real feeling of this main street, where it's definitely slower, and people are really taking over the street, in that, you know, they're parking their cars here and it feels safe enough to get out. It encourages a slowness here and a real human scale with what's going on. And so we have images of what these roads actually look like in person, and precedents of places that have gone from a very similar, you know, width of street and speed of traffic, where people are just going through, to transforming it completely. It's quite night and day to take it from that to that. So these are all the character illustrations that in the report. There's more images of what these places could look like, to hopefully inspire folks as they're looking at it, of what do we actually want this place to look like, to feel like, because you can't convey feeling often with words alone. So I've kind of spoken about this throughout, but a high level look at community feedback as we've been going out and doing this. I know it's been, you know, an important thing to know that it's not just something that's coming from the minds of a few, but that there's actually support for. And we were able to not only hold the open house, but also go to the back to school community event. And while we did not get as many responses from the community event, we got a lot of verbal agreements in that time, and people that were really excited to hear about it. And it was a population that I believe has not been engaged before, through, you know, having some of the community meetings where folks have to come. There were hundreds of people there that we got to talk to who had never heard about any of this. And so that was exciting, and they supported it. And it was people who lived close. So it was folks who most of them walked here from very nearby. And so they were really excited to hear about this, and definitely had support for improving the walkability of the area. I also do think that it is interesting to point out that the transportation priorities are the ones that seem the most right to people, that they have the most support for. And when we look at the comments that folks gave within this, I kind of alluded to it in the beginning, But everyone seemed, a greater mix of uses and a higher density of housing. People are most on board with that when they can get something out of it, right? If you just invite more people, but nothing else changes, no one really wants that. You kind of can, you get more of the negative impacts perhaps that you don't want without getting the improvements that you do want. And so I think, as you continue to go forward, just making sure, how are we not compromising, I guess, on some of these really important factors that we want, and just having an increase in housing without also making sure that we're getting some of these other things that that you all have outlined and then the community has supported and agreed with.
What's the lease con?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So these were the specific questions that were asked in reference to, there were boards. And so it was everything really that was on this page with like associated text, and there were some images that went along with that. So it wasn't really drilled down in specific, but there were opportunities for people to give their comments and more specificity. So we have a document full of their comments as well, with ideas on what to do.
What they were provided with was were these the top-down concepts that show building massing and things of that nature. So that's what it was really in reference to. Some of the things that she also showed on the previous slides with the building heights laid out and everything like that.
And I asked them, not clear about it, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
So when I look at these two pictures right here, I'm going, yeah, that's it. The connectivity there in the back of Lorton Market, over to the neighborhood where we are right now, that kind of stuff, and connecting into Hudson Plaza and all those kind of things. But some of the other things, like the streetscapes and stuff, were those in the question? Were those?
No, they were not yet.
And that's where I hang up a little bit on that, because I was just going to say, hey, as we go forward studying this, one of the examples you gave, it's like, kind of counts for working with center parking in an area or something.
Yeah, it would. I mean, there would still be further study.
Right.
It's just kind of to give an option to see if people would want that as a trade-off. The transportation consultants and FCDOT are looking at all these things. So that's why I'm not guaranteeing.
But I guess we definitely have to consider the traffic count for our recommendations for the specific streetscapes and stuff like that, because like we've talked about before, most of these roads, unfortunately, and that's the biggest problem, is they don't have options for other roads. It's the only way you can get from a. So,
and so
I have a little bit of.
Yeah, and that's a very important point that within this, FCDOT is looking at that. But part of this is that we're encouraging people to have a mix, or we're encouraging a mix of uses, right? So we're hoping that we're attracting people who will do more than one thing here. They won't just live here. They'll live and work here. They'll live and play here. Have their activities. So they're not going to be driving as far and doing that. So, and there's encouraging other modes that they can get around would also be a mitigating factor in that. But it does still stand that, there are trade-offs with the vision. And we've talked about this the whole time, that there are trade-offs in you're not going to be flying down the road the same way. And we did hear too, though, that there's already, the timing of the traffic lights, and some of you got stuck at really long traffic lights, and that's a real thing. And so it's a consideration going forward. But again, if these things work in concert, and so if this is the vision that you want, then there are some things that will change. But with that, how can, it might encourage traffic patterns to change, and there are opportunities to do, have creative solutions that are outside of this to help mitigate some of those things. But it is a conversation that is not closed with this. This is not the end all be all. This is saying, here's some opportunities, and let's continue with the momentum that we have, with the vision that we've now coalesced around to continue moving forward. And it will not look exactly like this. If it did, that would be amazing. But
One of the things we don't seem to be addressing yet is parking, and maybe you're in your head, like maybe garage parking underneath something or something like that.
Exactly.
But just, definitely need to do that, because this area, whether we make it, somewhat self-sufficient
Yeah.
with retail and jobs and housing and stuff like that, it still serves a somewhat
People
less
still need it.
density.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying the people that around it depend on it, less dense areas, out on 123, down Mason Neck, everything that basically
Yeah.
surrounds the general area. They have to still get there, and they do rely on those needs also that others
Yeah.
that live here.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
So within these numbers, I'll respond to that and then we can go to your question. Within these numbers, we were considering parking in all of this. So the renderings that were even shown here they do have parking structures. So this is a parking structure. This is a parking structure. They've accounted for them at the rate that is already in county policy. At, hopeful TOD, more adjacent to TOD levels. But parking is not just fully out the window. There are real calculations that have been accounted for in here.
Three things. First one is with regard to parking. The Board of Supervisors just recently passed what's called parking agreement.
Yes.
And I think it would be helpful going forward as you introduce this show how this comports to the vision,
Mhm.
which I think fits in with what you're doing.
We aligned it with parking agreement.
Perfect. I think that's a good point to bring out
Yeah.
as you're doing presentations. That's kind of a future-looking visionary
Mhm.
component, so that's good. Two questions. The buildings you've portrayed along Richmond Highway, are they anticipated to be mix of residential and commercial, or primarily one or the other?
So I'm actually going to go back to,
Yes.
oh wait, sorry, it's right here. Okay, so everything, it's harder to see because each floor is pretty small in here, but everywhere that you see red is commercial. So these bottom floors that front
Okay.
this green,
Okay.
the ones that front Richmond Highway, and then that's primarily, and then on this side of these buildings. So the rest of it is residential, and then non-residential, whether that be retail, whether that be office. We have a mix that we have anticipated, but
Granted, you're planning for the future, but a lot of sensitivity these days is the issue of commercial in their offices type concepts and how that plays out in designing for the future. That's seen quite a lot of discussion and action regarding retrofitting commercial buildings for residential or combined use. So how do you tough to account for that in the presentation? So it shows you're planning for that type of future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on how you present this. It's a mix of both, or what do you anticipate for office?
Yeah. So we have anticipated not a lot of office space. We can go back to this number. So 60,000 square feet.
Okay.
Of office, and that just being 190 jobs. So there's still some, market for that. And offices, we're going back to 3 days a week. Offices will still exist. They won't exist in the same way that they did. And yeah, there's a lot in the district that, sorry, as well. Retrofitting is definitely a thing, and it's some buildings are much harder to retrofit than others. So this is looking at a future, and Lance can kind of speak to some of this when he goes soon. To say, from a market perspective, what does that look like? So
I think this slide is very helpful. I think it helps anticipate the scale and scope of what we're looking at in terms of residential, office, and community jobs, things like that. So I find that very useful.
Yeah. And yeah, the numbers that went into this had all the parking for each of these types based on parking reimagined as well. But it's not just pie in the sky. It's been grounded in reality.
I bring that out too. That's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna.
Well, go ahead.
I want Lance to be able to to explain his part, but are there any on related less
Maybe
maybe to the
Talking
market?
about the transportation connectivity
Mhm.
and the cross-county trail and the connections. We list potential
Mm-hmm.
connection. Is that potential because we're not sure where things are going, or can we be more intentional than to say, this is what?
Potential means desired. But when it doesn't already exist, the word just in planning is that is the desired future. But it's like a proposed.
Like right of ways, right? That have to be wired.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Some
so
of
it's
it's trail, some of them might belong to the county.
Mhm.
Some of the spots.
And it's-
some spots are in private ownership, but already planned for future parks. Okay.
the words are important, but yeah.
On the graphic you're showing right there, thank you for bringing it back up. By the way, if we had numbered slides, then we could go with, hey, could you go to 3 or 5 or 7?
Numbers are hidden.
But that's okay. Where you see on the far right, Pohick Estates Park, Southgate Park, Sheffield Park.
Mhm.
The connection to Lorton Station Boulevard. Right now, you have 2 connections, all the way up to the top of Lorton Station Boulevard, all the way down to Richmond Highway. It might be important to look at trail connections, and you can see the green space already existing in there on an upper and a lower before going to the very top and the very bottom, just so that people could flow toward Lorton Station, flow toward the Amtrak, flow toward the DRE, et cetera, rather than having to go all the way up to come down
Mhm.
and all the way down to come up or over. So that might be worthwhile looking at just to reemphasize
Yeah.
the idea of trail connectors and sidewalk connectors in order to facilitate people without cars.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people in Sheffield Park, Pohick Estates, and Southgate. I mean, that's a lot of people.
I want to try to incorporate a park into some of the RPA or something kind of it's similar we're talking about because those other parts that you mentioned right there, a couple of them are not that one. There you go. But that's the other side of it. That's already a park. That's the ball fields. No, it's not. The ball fields are further down. Yeah, you've got it in the right place, but I think there's potential to have it by Lorton Road also. But yeah, I did miss thanks for thinking.
And I think something that is, I think it's potential to add similar to what we've done over here, where we haven't said, exactly, this is not to say like exactly where the road should go, just that we want street connectivity improvements could happen similarly over here, because knowing that these are HOAs, dramatically improves the challenge there, but not to say that it's not important. It's still to put out there so that it can, be a part of the vision. So appreciate the feedback.
But the Sheffield Park, I'm almost 100% sure that that is actually a name for the states.
So just, it's the easements to get through here from the park, I think.
Well, I'm just saying the neighborhood would say that.
Yeah.
For Sheffield.
There'd be conversations.
Yeah, for Sheffield Park, for sure. The others, it's just clearly Fairfax County Park Authority. Okay, but I think that also. It's a separate one.
Yeah.
Outside.
Anyone had a question, then we'll
Just following up on Commissioner Clark's point about the word to use. So I think when we get to the plan amendment stage, we would probably use the word trail, as a potential trail. After conversing with colleague over here on the language, but yeah, I think usually we use plan. Yeah. So I'm trying to wrap my head around we've got
I see it kind of go 1, 2, 3, and I see the 3 circles, and I see the everything up with Lorton Station proper and Gunston Plaza and Lorton Market Station, but they're still fairly feeling independent from each other. Can you talk to how they can be A, connected, and B, envisioned so that they are complementing each other and not competing against each other? Make it one instead of, I guess I'm trying to get to 1 instead of 3.
Mhm.
And it's still feeling a bit to me like 3.
It's in the grown form.
I think a few things with that. One, the actual street improvements will be very big towards feeling a sense of cohesion. And if, Lance just visited here for the first time and I commented on it the first time that I was here, but the things actually are much closer than you think when you're traveling around in Google Maps. And part of that, you can stand here and look at Gunston Plaza, but it doesn't feel like you're invited to really travel between the two based on, the type of development that's happening, the type of street that is there. And so I think a lot of this comes from, you're looking down here and, it feels more continuous. The other thing that we've talked about that because people own those homes and we can't, show the renderings of what that looks like is that, along here, and over in here and even these neighborhoods that there could be, potential for change that really brings the connection there. And so without having, kind of an aerial rendering of a video that kind of dives you through all of that, I wish I could provide that for you to help you really envision it. But I think it's going to be the combination of, the streets making the cohesion feel like you're actually invited between places, that you can exist between places, that you don't just have to be here or just have to be there. And then the development encourages more of a continuous walk. Because I think, we've had experiences where you even get outside of a car at a shopping center and you go to one store, but you don't want to walk in the parking lot. And so you get back into your car and you drive to another place. So the hope of this would be that even if you're standing, you're here, that you actually feel like you can walk between them.
One more thing. Each of these circles. Sorry. So
Yeah.
within the quarter mile and then going on even further to the half mile, we're preparing for our impact analysis. Look at not just each of these 6 activity nodes in terms of land use changes, but looking at a kind of a smoothed out transect model of increased density across that entire half mile. So to your point, Nick, how do you get cohesion between these? A lot of that is going to be in that step down density level that we're going to be evaluating. That's not just each of the activity centers in isolation, as they are today, but looking at how could you plan these in a transect model so that you decrease density relative to the greatest concentrations in the core, so that you do get that new look, that new activity level, that street wall, on Lorton Station Boulevard, Lorton Road, Richmond Highway, so that you do get that character and cohesion to the community. It's not uniformly intense all the way along. You still have central nodes of activity, but you do have a unification efficiency or the potential for unification across all the areas, basically that aren't the street valleys, especially between I want to bring that up. That's not shown here because we've been kind of focusing on these elements here, but it is something supplement.
I want to make sure
the vision. It's the difference now between kind of like what Graham was saying and also what Beck was saying. It's like feeling like I'm in one place and then feeling like I'm in another place when I move about. It's the approach to these different places, the in-between things that we also have to look at. And some of that stuff happens in the public realm with the transportation networks. Some of that stuff may happen with the way that we step down additional development that'll help to support each of those sites, when you get off site of those. But
so when Graham says the transect, it's like what happens at different distances outside of, our most intense core area. And so with the recommendations, you have your traditional zoning codes that just say you're allowed to have this type of use here, but there's also recommendations that we have that says, well, you have to front your building here. You can't put parking in front of it. It's got to go behind. There has to be activation of the bottom floor when it's here, so that you're not walking by something that's a dead wall. You're actually walking by something that feels lively, that connects you. You have something.
And that's my general concern. Is I want to make sure that when you're starting either Lorton Station Boulevard already has a challenge, which is you already have all this housing. So if you're there at that place, then you want to go to the next, you got to go through the housing section. So you're just going to drive. And the same would be, we want to make sure that you don't have that with Lorton Market Station, and then you go, okay, I've got all this, but I want to go over to Gunston, and then you've got to get it back in the car. So you want to have enough stuff along the way that it's still part of a continuation of it. It might be stepped down. I don't care if it's big, tall, just that it's a similar kind, has a similar feel, so that you feel like you're part of the same place, the same part.
Yeah, that's a thing, because you want to create this magnetism between the different sites.
Right, yeah.
And that's what we're going to be. That's part of their recommendation, but when we talk about these central points for these places, the biggest change is going to happen at these places that she's shown. The taller buildings,
Sure.
the highest densities. But then how do you create that magnetism between those points of higher density, where someone wants to walk there instead of drive there, someone wants to ride their bike there instead of drive there. All that is going to be part of all those recommendations carry over to the plan.
And there are more urban design recommendations and images to give context to that and help illustrate it in the report that we've written. Couldn't show it all here tonight, but it's a very important point, and it doesn't.
It was in Reston earlier today, and suddenly, talking about parking and things like that. Do you anticipate that something similar to? Do you anticipate parking within each of the nodes, central area, or within buildings that are also office or residential? Do you anticipate something like you might see in Reston, separate garage areas, or is that too early?
So I think there's different opportunities. What often works well, I was just in Charlottesville, and I took the Amtrak there. What?
Nothing. It's a tasteless comment from a Virginia. I couldn't resist.
But I took a few pictures of, residential buildings where, from a design perspective, you still have fronting with active uses. It was apartment complexes. It points you to where parking is, so it's not hidden from your knowledge, but it is more hidden from your sight. And so the, recommendations that we would have would be that parking is in the back of a building. It doesn't mean that it can't be on, the ground floor, but that there's active uses, at least in the front. And then, yes, that it will have to exist at each kind of node, because there's enough pull of activity to require it.
So within each node, it wouldn't work as well as it can rest in other words, a large central parking area.
It would still be a large central within the node, but it wouldn't be shared between nodes. Like, we're not thinking that someone's going to walk, a quarter mile to their park.
Okay. Another thing is the Charlottesville is the wayfinding signage thing.
Exactly.
It's really easy to get around Charlottesville. I've noticed, especially in the downtown. Wayfinding signage. And that's going to be a part of the recommendation of this too.
Use that this year.
So speaking of the parking and parking garage, I was talking with friends the other day about National Harbor, and I've seen some folks, or the folks I speak with, don't tend to go there. So much traffic backed up. And one of the things I noticed is that the parking garage is in the center
Mhm.
of the activity. So traffic backs up, they're trying to
Yeah.
walk. Yeah, but you can't get to a parking garage because of that. So I think it's something that we can keep in mind
Mhm.
here, right?
That's, yeah, kind of the site, more site plan level, but,
Yeah.
where we have put it.
Speaking of National Harbor, I think I can think of a sentence that I'd be a big advocate for in the comprehensive plan as we do it, that says, no parking will be paid.
That's a very tall ask for parking garages. I think a common thing is there, if you get, okay, I live right by a Trader Joe's. I bike, but I have gotten stuck in the parking garage before. And they always ask me if I need my parking validated, right? So if you're there only for an hour, or if you shop somewhere and you get it validated, it's free. Or the first hour is free. So anyone running an errand, it's free. But if you're staying there for an extended period of time, you're paid. I'm not telling you all the details of how the parking, how how it will be paid for, but there are very few parking garages in the world that are completely free forever. So I will say that it's a great dream to have.
That's why we need to put it in.
I'll just say one thing. I know Lance was present a little bit. The one thing that I wanted to reiterate, a couple of months ago, we had a task force meeting where parking came up. And one of the things that we've been kind of tracking, now that parking reimagined has been adopted, becomes ever more evident, is that the county's parking really is controlled by the zoning ordinance. We don't have, frankly, very much in terms of parking policy, so to speak, that lives in the comprehensive plan. So one thing, if this moves forward, I'm assuming that it will, and it'll be adopted, part of the comprehensive plan, is there will be a need to kind of identify how to implement this plan, because there's some specific things that on the county side can do, and then there's plenty that the development community will. One of the things that I think we want to take another look at the right time, following the adoption of this, is how to look at parking, so Lorton suburban centers specifically, because it's one of these areas where we don't really have a core of activity today. That's why we're here. And as a result, because it doesn't have that core of activity, we actually have a higher parking rate within the zoning ordinance than other similar suburban centers. So I just want to say that issue is critical for trying to get the type of activity that we want here. So I just want to say that we're tracking that. I think that there's significant interest. Fire. Won't be part of this, but I think it can be.
Very good comments and questions so far. Thank you. Okay. The last slide I had was just the community comments. We mostly talked about it. Housing to bring other community improvements and amenities. Development must consider protection of natural resources, and then pedestrian and bicyclist safety is a top concern. So I just picked some example quotes from the comments that we've gotten, summarized the themes. But with that, I am going to turn it over to Lance.
In conclusion.
More discussion to come, right? Great to meet you all in person. My name is Lance Dorn, as Steve introduced me to beginning of the meeting today. I was on the very first task force meeting with you all, but I was on a computer screen, and so I felt a little bit disconnected, but it's great to meet you all in person. It's a little bit about who I am. I work for SB Friedman. We're a real estate and economic development consulting firm, and much of my work is focused on exactly what we're talking about here, thinking about ways in which we can sort of shift the private real estate market to implement the vision that's been outlined by the public sector and the community. And so the tasks that I've specifically been asked to cover here, I'm not the loudest guy in the room, so if you need me to talk up, certainly go like that or speak up. So the work that I've been asked to think about here as part of the Lorton visioning effort is how can we, as the public sector, as the community, really push the private sector to implement this vision that's been outlined. As you can tell, it's a pretty transformational vision that the community has identified, and it's going to require some pretty heavy lifting, not just from the private real estate community, but also the public sector to implement. And so what we've done here is we've outlined some potential strategies that the public sector and the stakeholders could undertake to encourage redevelopment. The approach that we took was multifaceted. We engaged with community departments, specifically the Department of Economic Initiatives and the Economic Development Authority, to understand what their priorities are and what sort of tools might be available to facilitate development. We conducted outreach to developers active in Fairfax County to understand what they see are potential strategies to facilitate redevelopment. We engaged with the property owners in the areas that were identified for change within the visioning document, and then conducted some local really helped to communicate how those interventions have been successful in shifting the market trajectory of other areas in the county. And so you might be wondering why the public sector would need to intervene in the private real estate market in order to shift the market trajectory of an area. And specifically here in Lorton, we think that intervention is needed because of these three statements that we've outlined here on the screen. There is a desire for placemaking and local economic development, and quite frankly, the private real estate market does not deliver placemaking and local economic development on its own. It requires investment and intervention by the public sector. The land use framework has not promoted, or the existing land use framework has not promoted or encouraged the development that aligns with the community. There's a desire for a higher level or a higher caliber of development than what's been being delivered by right by the private real estate market. And private owners control much of the areas that have been identified for change. And what we learned speaking with each of the property owners or representatives of the property owners from the three largest areas of potential change is, from a real estate investment perspective, those properties are actually performing pretty well. They're pretty well leased, and they are meeting the needs of the community from a real estate perspective or an investment perspective. It might not be necessarily what the community wants, but from the real estate perspective, they are well functioning. And so if we're hoping to encourage private landowners to make a big change relative to what's being presented in the vision, it's going to be a heavy lift, and we really need to encourage and push and offer incentives in order for that to make potential changes. So in terms of potential interventions, again, these are focused on getting the real estate market to shift to implement the community's vision. But we've identified 5 different buckets of interventions. That is not the right button for the mouse. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. We've identified 5 potential market-related strategic interventions. These are buckets of interventions that, again, could help shift the market position of the area and deliver the type of product that's desired by the community. And so there's regulatory and zoning related adjustments that could occur, direct investment in public realm and infrastructure, the activation of county land or strategic acquisition, development incentives, and place-based economic development organization to really be a champion for the plan. So one thing I just want to note is we've been involved with this planning process all along, and so some of the things that I'm about to review specifically in these first 2 buckets are things that have already been incorporated into the planning. But really these last 3 things are, again, potential approaches that could be taken once you're through the visioning process and through the comprehensive plan amendment process to focus on implementation. So the first one relates to regulatory and zoning. So as we know, the real estate market has been according to the property owners, functioning in a way that it's delivering the level of product that the real estate market wants to deliver on its own without intervention. And so the vision that's been outlined by the community is a pretty significant change, and really to facilitate that type of change, you need to allow more flexibility within the development framework to encourage that type of development. So again, many of these points that are up on the screen have already been incorporated into the plan, but if we really want to shift the market trajectory of this area, we want to allow a development framework that aligns with current development trends. And so current development trends are mixed-use development. So here, encouraging mid-rise mixed-use development at strategic locations. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first is to align with recent development trends, but as we're thinking about wanting an additional caliber of development here, we need to expand the commercial base. So if we want a higher level of retail, we need more rooftops in order to support that higher level of retail that's currently here. In terms of expanding the consumer base, we really want to think about what is the right mix of residential uses. And so if we're trying to expand the consumer base, expand the population base, one key strategy is to introduce a mix of residential types that appeals to a wide range of potential housing market segments. So having workforce housing, having market rate housing, apartments, townhomes, single family home, appeal to a wide range of the housing market. In terms of regulatory and zoning too, also encouraging intensification of employment-related uses. We heard this through the planning effort that there is a desire for more employment directly in Lorton. And we heard from other county departments that there's really, they have to turn away opportunities in the flex, innovation, and clean lab space. So providing opportunities for that sort of development to occur in the community.
They turned away clean use?
There's been tenants within those buckets that have been looking for sites within Fairfax County and haven't been able to find appropriate sites in which we can provide opportunities for those types of uses within the county. Thank you. Sorry if that was being unclear. And then lastly, this discussion about mobility connections and really reconnecting and establishing a grid within the Lorton community. We see it important from a market perspective because those connections are important for connecting potential consumers to retailers and really introducing an ecosystem that can encourage the type of commercial development and residential development that's desired. For the sake of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on the case studies, but we have identified case studies within the document. The second strategic intervention that we've identified is direct investment in the public realm and infrastructure. And so the visioning document presents some pretty significant changes within the public realm as we've been discussing here. And we've heard that placemaking is really important to try to establish a unique sense of place for the Lorton community. And so the planning effort and the vision is really trying to reinforce a unique sense of place. And so that can be through signage, public art, landscaping, but also thinking about how to create placemaking opportunities that align with current development trends. A lot of the commercial development that's been occurring has been experiential in nature, so trying to create an experience where someone wants to go to an area, experience more than just your standard shopping that you might see in any suburban center, and a unique mix and different typologies relative to, again, your kind of run-of-the-mill development. We also think that direct investments in that compelling public space that was mentioned earlier. I think we spent some time looking at the graphic specifically for Gunston Plaza that incorporated that public square, a new really central node for the community. And so developing a compelling public space like that is really an opportunity to shift the market, because if you're able to program that space in a way that attracts more activity, the retailers and the commercial uses will follow that activation, and people might even want to live adjacent to that given the activation that's occurring there. So making a direct investment in a compelling public space we think is important for recognizing or realizing the vision that's outlined here. The second one here, improve linkages between anchors and areas identified for change. We mentioned that as we were talking about connectivity, but also thinking about placing any new county facilities and locations where it can catalyze private investment. We know that there's been a lot of investment recently in county facilities here in Lorton, but if there are any additional investment that occurs over the long term, really trying to position those in a way that there's spin-off potential. If you have high activity use, those people that might be coming to that use might have to go to the dry cleaners after. They might want to grab dinner after, thinking about really those co-tenancies. With it, I guess the most strategic ways in which the county can shift the market potential of an area is thinking about its underutilized land resources. And so this is a map here that's illustrating some of the publicly owned parcels within the community. Not all of these are developable. Some of them are protected or serve an ecological function, but really taking a close look at what is the potential land that could be brought forth to the private market. So is there land that could be sold or that could be leased? to developers, provided that the development that occurs on those properties is in a way that aligns with the community's vision. And so there's a process that could be taken to facilitate the community's vision from a development perspective on county-owned land. The county can also be proactive in terms of strategic acquisition, thinking about what sort of land assembly might need to occur in order to move forward with development. The county also has development incentives that are at their disposal to encourage redevelopment efforts. The one thing to note here is that, as I mentioned earlier, we did learn from the private property owners that they feel like these properties are performing well from an investment perspective. One strategy that we've seen other municipalities take to try to encourage redevelopment is having conversations with those property owners and really making the business case to them for redevelopment. So if they're generating a certain return on investment, if you're able to demonstrate that a higher density of uses or intensification could produce a higher rate of return, really trying to push them to consider that making that investment. If you have those types of conversations, it's important to think about the different sort of incentives that the county could bring forth to those conversations. So it might be encouraging someone to pursue redevelopment, but here's our toolkit of potential incentives to make that redevelopment financially feasible. Once you're through the visioning process and the comp plan update process, one approach too is really be proactive in terms of outreach to developers. And so if you've established what the vision is, you have sites that might be available for redevelopment, you have incentives, doing that outreach to the development community to say this is the type of development that we would like to see, this is what we're able to bring to the table as the county and the stakeholders, and let's have conversations about what sort of change could potentially come to the community. And then this last one is really focused on identifying a place-based economic development organization. So identifying someone that could be a champion for redevelopment within Lorton as redevelopment continues over the long term. So identifying an organization that could think about place-based economic development from an attraction and retention of consumers perspective. So thinking about programming, branding, different things to create a sense of place within Lorton, and then identifying ways in which to attract commercial activity, visitors, and identify different development opportunities and presenting those opportunities to the development community. And so these are all potential ways in which the public sector and stakeholders could really catalyze or jumpstart the private real estate market. Want to open up for discussion if there's other questions about any of these topics here, or if there's any different strategies that folks have seen work elsewhere that maybe we should be considering as we move forward. Yeah.
Just a question to start. I think one of the things we've seen over time, and I'm speaking very generally, in other areas of the county, is the debate over density. So in other words, an incentive might be to allow more density than had been initially planned or anticipated. What's the reaction to that? And I think you'll get plenty of support with economic incentives, but the density incentives may be problematic.
Density reaction from whom? The
Citizens.
Citizens. What we're really trying to outline here are different approaches to implement that vision that was determined through the community process. And so thinking about density, I believe there's a lot of positive feedback as it related to the graphics that were presented.
Not the density that's being proposed. I think the density that's being proposed has been, community input has been accepted. I'm thinking in your negotiations, in public-private negotiations, you may get encouragement to make density in some areas even higher.
Higher, got it.
That's the point where you may have some challenge.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, development as an incentive is within the regulatory and zoning kind of bucket that Lance has outlined here. And I mean, I think that especially around, in the Gunston area, that's a lot more than what's currently allowed. So that is an incentive. And I think that's where that fits in with what Lance was outlining of making the business case to them and showing them, okay, what could an example pro forma look like for this level intensity of uses? You you like your returns right now, maybe in a few years it's not looking as good, or even right now, seeing what you could be making versus what you are making, it combines that, intensity of use and development with actually the numbers behind it instead of, which is what they would look at, right? So I think my answer to you is yes, it is an incentive, but that's kind of how you would use it, is you would kind of show them what's possible if they're not immediately jumping at it.
Well, and I think in terms of citizen input too,
Mm-hmm.
Your plan has identified an incremental growth and the numerical growth. And I think while that's not set in stone, it's helpful in terms of discussions, not only for public awareness and acceptance, as well as your conversations with future development.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. Understanding that the density here has been vetted by the communities and accepted by the community, you can bring forth the actual economics of a redevelopment project to those conversations. And if someone's trying to push you for further density that might not be accepted by the community, really need to prove that the economics work and that you have a feasible project under the development scenario that's outlined. And if there are situations in which maybe there are variations in terms of the level of return that a developer might achieve, there could be other incentives that the county could bring forth to ensure that the development aligns with what the community's expectations are. So property tax abatements or
public awareness, that may be the other component that you referenced, the economic incentives that
right. You could, in terms of actually improving the economics, maybe there's an infrastructure investment that could be made. Maybe there's some of that public realm improvements that we've discussed. The county could take some of that off of the private economic side of things, move it to the public side of the ledger in terms of trying to create a development project that's financially viable, financially feasible, something that's optimal from a real estate investment perspective.
So along the same lines as you mentioned earlier, having more rooftops to have retail.
Yeah.
But when you look at online commerce, so the physical plant of retail how are we planning for that? And I think about restaurants, right? And that's something that we all would tend to want to go to, and a nice restaurant. But we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure, welcome folks that will drive from other areas, other parts of the county to visit, right, to come to some of these restaurants, and to make sure that they're attracting the quality of restaurants that folks that we want to have.
Yeah, in our conversations with the shopping center owners, they very much acknowledged that they felt like the current tenant mix within the shopping centers is appropriate for the population density that's in the Lorton area. And so in terms of trying to achieve that higher caliber, it's really, to the earlier point, trying to intensify the level of density within the area to provide those additional rooftops. But to your point too, making it possible to attract people from outside of the Lorton area specifically to bring in their consumer expenditure money and investing it and spending it here in Lorton. So the things that we've seen in terms of retail trends is the areas that people are willing to drive for are the places that are unique, have a sense of character, and offer something that's a little bit different relative to what you might be able to get down the street. And so being really careful in terms of what that retail mix might be is one approach that communities have taken, incentivizing the right types of retailers or commercial properties that really advance that idea of creating something that's new and unique that someone's willing to drive for. So the planning framework should accommodate the fact that people are driving in addition to walking from the local community area. Great.
Yeah, right in the middle here. Like Paul Hoffman. I wanted to actually reiterate something in the open house, which is about the VRE parking lot area. We have these 3 nodes in the core area that are identified as the areas where we think greater densities would be. Western Plaza kind of being the one that had greater concentration of inside. VRE station. We got it noted there, it's county-owned land. And if you look at that in combination with our ability to reach out to helpers and to we could do that fairly quickly. So, Martin was describing about density. One thing I was actually kind of thinking is we provided enough density in our vision document for that specific parcel, given that it's the board's property. It's not immediately adjacent to anything that isn't. Back in the bit you have so ability, that might be a good location for higher density relative to what we had planned. It has that gradient going up towards the common park area. It's 6 to 7 stories, tapering down to 4. I wonder if the whole thing would be something that might be more appropriate for us type of products. That's an easy point that if we want, we might be able to get something going there quicker. Kind of just like a cat. Food for thought that it might be a location that can refine this plan. Good way to think about that. And maybe I've seen that at preliminary conversations about.
Yeah. I think that is one of your very near-term development opportunities because of the county ownership. And so it would require coordination with the VRE to make sure that you're still accommodating the parking uses on the site. But in terms of density, there are very few really adjacent homeowners that might be the folks who are least supportive of density, I would say. And so because of the relatively isolation of that site, isolation is probably too strong of a word, but it's a little bit removed from a lot of the more ownership properties. I think that is an opportunity in which you can have a high density product. Again, easy to facilitate in the near term because of county ownership. And so I think that's a way to really start thinking about how to increase rooftops, how to increase the consumer spending potential to try to then shift the trajectory on the commercial side of things. Oftentimes there's this sort of like chicken and an egg problem where the commercial development or retailers want to see the more rooftops, but in order to have the more rooftops, you need to have the commercial amenities where people want to be attracted to a site. And so that site specifically, I think, opportunity to increase the number of rooftops with the hope that that will support the additional commercial development and commercial development that's in line with the expectations.
That site is struggling a bit. That particular site is struggling a bit with its tenants. I think keep them in there. So.
Couldn't help but notice in two of the examples you were showing in that were done in Fairfax County that there were the Mosaic Development Authority, there was an Annandale Development Authority. Who creates that authority? Is that the group that a developer would go to or the community would refer to go to that authority to get more information, to understand the plan, to have the plan fleshed out, specifically to maintain a website. I mean, I'm trying to figure out who this, unless it's Graham, and Graham never sleeps, and we can just put it in his house, and I feel good with that. But I mean, there has to be a focal point for this, and we keep on. Who's going to do the encouraging? Who's going to do the task force?
You all right?
Yeah.
The next 10 years.
I think
I'd like to say that because you can't get much more south or east than us, but they have not been players down here for us.
Right, and we've been having these discussions as we've been going through this process, but we do think it is very important to have a champion for the plan that's really committed in a local place-based economic development agency. And so thinking about it, not just from like this entity can be the one that focuses on the programming, bringing the folks to the site, whether it be through community events, but also creating that connection that you're talking about, connecting potential developers with the resources at the county or making the connections between a business owner and a developer that might need to come together in order to make some sort of new development happen. So having that agency be sort of the lead for economic development efforts, I think is important, or having a agency being the lead for economic development. We've had discussions about, we think that this would be this organization specifically would be someone that could potentially has been successful further up Richmond Highway, and potentially there could be discussions to sort of encourage their reach or the area in which they serve. We have not obviously had discussions with these folks in terms of actually doing that, but there could be a discussion to, again, have them think about expanding their service area or creating a very similar agency or organization that's focused on Lorton.
So this organization had focused in the charter as more so up to
Yeah.
Fort Belvoir. And that's kind of where.
Not surprised. And that's pretty much the history of where we are.
Yeah.
You can go BRT parts 1 and 2 up to Fort Belvoir. I mean, there's a template there. I just think I'm super sensitive to that because somebody has to be the them at some point in time. We're going to be the them to put the plan together. And we could be the them that explains the plan to them and helps them understand the reality the community wants and needs and aspirations. But there needs to be somebody in a place that is able to translate that back to a developer who then says, you need to talk to Graham at the county because Graham has deep pockets or whatever. And they would then move forward with talking with land development services or planning and zoning, et cetera, to know exactly how that operates. And the only other thing I would caution is you mentioned that you look at the amount of county investment in the Lorton area. You always have to differentiate between, is that for Lorton specific, or is that because of the other things that exist down here? On Furnace Road, there's a great example of about a $7 million new valve that's coming in for wastewater. And someone would think, wow, the county's putting $7 million in Lorton. No, they're not. They're putting $7 million in order to take the wastewater out of Tyson's. So you have to kind of make that, is it for Lorton specific versus for general county utilization? And it just happens to be through us in order to get there. So that's just something to think about it and I would think SFDC would want to know that as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When I was thinking about those county investments, it's really thinking about the activity generating. So if it's something like, I mean, this is a brand new facility, but could it have been positioned a little bit differently to where there could have been more spin-off commercial development? Like someone could have come to the library, come to the community center, but gone across the street to go to the cafe and grab a coffee as part of that process. Or could you have dropped the kids off here and gone to a retailer next door?
There you go.
And so being really intentional about the county investments in activity generating uses and positioning them in a way to where there's that spin-off development potential, I think is really important. It's an anchor strategy that we've seen used in a lot of places.
Agreed.
Greg?
One thing I'll just mention briefly, you mentioned a template for how to kind of do this type of community building. Try to propel the that development. SFDC, not exclusively, but a lot of their work is operating in the revitalization areas north of Lorton. Similar types of revitalization groups that operate in some of the other revitalization areas of district centers. Group they're kind of tasked with kind of a unification revitalization. So one thing I mentioned earlier about parking, there's a benefit to having kind of a revitalization sort of designation from a parking standpoint because there's incentives for getting with revitalization kind of designation. One of the other huge benefits is that there is not a perfect template, but there is a tradition in the county of having these kinds of anchor organizations or place-based organizations that can help serve that revitalization function long term. So it's not just ad hoc group, it's something that's institutional. It's there to stay to help build on the vision as it develops out over years, decades. So it's not easy. I'll say that last thing. We're looking at a similar set of considerations right now in the Springfield area, because that's another area that seeking revitalization, but doesn't really have an SFDC type entity right now. Supervisor Lusk has been very interested in similar trying to put together a anchor organization for that area. So as mentioned, other places that are trying to solve this problem. We can learn from their experiences as they present this process. But just putting the flag in for thinking through the revitalization designation.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is having full-time professional staff to be the champion rather than a committee that is obviously pulled in many different directions, or even county staff that has a wide jurisdiction that they're responsible for. So a really true local-based organization.
Well, with that point, though, I think like part of the grassroots effort of this organization, grassroots effort from the people that live in that community, and being in that community. See, like the most successful ones I've seen, at least in smaller communities, have always been driven by like.
Yeah, I think a good approach is to have community members be on an advisory committee. And if you're able to find a full-time professional that has like a stake in the community, like that's the ideal situation because they're all in fully committed. You might not be able to find that full-time professional staff person, but at least the community should be advising that organization so that they're truly representing the desires of the community. Fully agree. So yes, as Graham mentioned, there are templates in place. There's organizations that there could be discussions about potentially expanding geographies. I think from my perspective, having an organization that already has a structure in place that can be expanded is easier than creating something entirely new. But then again, there's a lot of different considerations in terms of identifying who is the right champion and how do we ensure that this vision carries on. Either questions or thoughts about any of these? Any things you've seen done elsewhere you should be aware of? Probably running close on time.
Final slides. So a lot of work has been done. You guys have poured out a lot of work into all of this. We've hopefully translated it into a vision that captures what you've been hoping for, some of those foundational elements. Lance outlined the next steps. It's a vision, but now how does it get implemented? Equally important in that is that, it's got to be a place that people actually want to go, that they're excited about going, and that isn't just going to come because someone plops down a new building, right? It's the community that's there. It's people knowing each other. And that's what, you guys have been talking about. And we've heard from the community of can people actually interact with each other? Are they meeting each other? And so with that, we talk about placemaking. And so what opportunities do you have to improve place as development happens? These are really rhetorical. We can discuss a little bit, don't have a lot of time, but as it happens incrementally, how are you all in the community being invited into creating place and creating a place that you feel really represents Lorton, that you're excited to meet each other? And how do you activate the spaces that you already have? You don't have to wait on a new development to come to do stuff. And I think stuff is already happening here. It's already happening in, some of the places that you mentioned earlier. And so how can you continue building that momentum so that, there's more engagement from the community, that people are excited, that people are coming to these places when they're being built, that, it's supported by the community as it happens. So this wheel is from the Project for Public Spaces. And if you haven't taken a look at their work, I highly encourage you to, because it's really talking about, how do you move from just the building to a place that is lively, that is active, that serves the people. And so we've talked a lot about uses and activities. We have talked in part about comfort and image a lot, with the streetscapes and these things. We've talked about access and linkages, how, traffic data, you've got transit usage, pedestrian activity, but
Can you email this stuff?
Mhm.
That slide.
Mhm.
A lot of details.
There's a
there.
lot.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they have really good kind of exercises of going to a place and observing how people use it, who's not there, what are kind of the flows of people throughout the day at different times of day. Does it offer an amount of flexibility so that people can use it for different types of things? So what we have not talked about as much is the sociability aspect. And that is where all of these things really start to tie together. You know, you can have all these elements in place. You can have your developers on board. But are people actually going to be social together there? Is it actually going to draw that community? And so that is where I think right now you all have the opportunity to, you know, as the ones who've been most engaged in this so far, to start thinking about that. And that's something, you know, Lance brought up an economic development organization, but there's also place management organizations and people who help activate spaces that already exist. And so maybe it's, you know, kind of enveloped in the same thing, or maybe it's another thing. There's a lot of talent in the community, and there's people that, you know, get excited about meeting each other. And so I think one of the big things here is, you know, no place is made by one person ever. And we, you know, I don't know if we'd want that. It takes the collective. We want to meet each other. And so how do we invite people into doing that? And so, you know, I've heard about special events that happen, or even maybe some seasonal. I don't know if the market that happens at the town center is weekly anymore, but there's things that, you know, happen occasionally that do bring some folks together. But what I haven't heard a lot about, other than, you know, what happens maybe inside this building, is this daily activation level. And so these are things, you know, that draw people once or twice a year, then you go a little bit more frequent. But what makes a place really feel like a place is when you can drop in at any time of day, any time of week, and there's someone there. And it's a place where you can actually meet people. And so this just kind of has some examples of what happens and how to draw people in. And again, yeah, this organization has a lot of really good ideas of, you know, how are you involving folks in the arts community. We've heard a lot about the arts community within, you know, the Workhouse Art Center. And so how can, and we've heard the desire to tie that together with here. And, you know, the consultants prior to us had brought this vision of like creating those, you know, one-time kind of installations. But how can you have, you know, I was actually just at the, oh shoot, now I'm gonna forget. It was one of the art museums in DC, and they have weekly programming where artists come in and they, you know, there were people writing poems for folks. There were these boards that kids could draw on. So there's different ways of like just, and it's not cost, they don't, you know, varying levels of cost for these. They can be pop-up little events, but that just start to bring the community together so that there's, you know, you're not waiting for some big activity as like, that's when we'll have made it, that it's building along the way. And so I just want to start to get you thinking about these things. And as you're talking to folks in the community, people who have skills, who have passions, how can they be engaged? And start small and start with the things that you have, right? Start with more things happening on this lawn, in this park, in this building, on the BRE parking lots. What can, you know, having sidewalk art competitions, things like there are a ton of ideas. And so starting to think creatively. And yeah, so this is kind of the end of that, but that was part of just kind of the next steps. It's not just from an economic perspective, but from a community building perspective. And that's what, if I've heard anything right, it's that you guys, you don't just want more restaurants you can go eat at. You want to feel like you actually have a place to meet people in a community that you can interact with, that you're not just all driving in your cars to other places. So
Can you back up one slide for a minute?
Mhm.
See the other access and just thank you.
So,
Laura, just one thing. I know we, been at this for a little while, right? So, access and linkages. That's the one thing that necessary. I think on your chart where you're saying planned connections, and I know the focus area is more on, I'm gonna call the legacy areas of Lorton, not the areas that most of us live in. That was converted from the prison or the historical Masonic area. But I didn't necessarily see or just not to forget about the local community connections to get us who already live in the community. How do we get to these nodes that live on the other side of 95 that's not in the focus area without having to drive there, right? And I think we talked a lot about keeping people who visit us for the VRE and the Amtrak
Mhm.
to actually spend their dollars here. But also, how do we create that, I think we were calling that center.
Mhm.
And I think if we all remember, we couldn't all agree on what a center was. So we started dealing with the different nodes. But I know in the group I was in, we thought that like Lorton Road is that center connection.
Mhm.
It just so happens that, like you said, VRE
Mhm.
is a artery off of that
Mhm.
node.
Mhm.
But really that node is between Gunston and Marketplace to me.
Mhm.
And that's going to get me to walk off of Lorton Road underneath, 95
Mhm.
with some good lighting to come on the other side and not have to drive.
Mhm.
Right. So just, I don't know if that's the BRE or how do we make that connections where existing community members, we buy where we live.
Mhm.
Because otherwise we're going north to Springfield or Shirlington, or we're going south to Woodbridge.
Mhm.
Avoiding Tyson's probably because of the traffic, but I mean, that's where I think we're going. That's where I'm going,
Mhm. Yeah.
north to south.
So primarily you're talking about the west side of 95.
Yes, we're potentially where I think most of us live, except for probably like two task members I think are in the focus area.
Yeah, yeah. So given the distance, I think, there's been conversation about shuttles, but primarily shuttles for getting to the, from BRT to the VRE. There could be, there's examples of St. Louis had one. You need a concentrated area of activity on the other side, really. You're not going to have a shuttle that goes to individuals' homes. So you need kind of a common pickup place, right? So maybe that is the Workhouse Art Center, and maybe there's a shuttle that goes there. Maybe it's also the Amtrak auto train. But there's examples of, they're not golf carts, they're a little bigger. But having a brand, and they're actually branded. They're branded by the example that I'm thinking of in St. Louis is branded by the St. Louis, maybe it's the Development Corporation there. And it was funded by businesses who had an interest to collectively, share their the folks that were visiting, right? That they said we actually are worth more together than we are individually, or even the sum of us. That if we, there's this multiplicative power if we do something like this. So,
Go back to the other slide too.
which one?
The
pyramid?
There you go. Yeah. I think we subject of discussion, this is not anything, but I think what you're talking about here is marketing and timing.
Mhm.
And, marketing can start almost tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the there, if you're not ready for that influx, it could discourage people from coming at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in perhaps a plan here, in terms of not only redevelopment, but economic development, it might be helpful to have a sense of timing to present to the board or whatever, so that you're not only investing in infrastructure and capital, things, you're investing in a good outreach,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're encouraging people and building it into the program, because it's going to take a while,
Mm-hmm.
not only to build the new Lorton, but gain an audience.
Yeah.
You've got other areas pushing for that. So maybe within the plans here is to include an outreach / marketing program that incents investment from the county and or the development community. Plus provides good timing to make that happen. And you can go out and look at partners like the South Fairfax Chamber of Commerce, that's FBC, and see, I think what we're talking about is a mighty, mighty big job, and a lot of people think one poor Chamber of Commerce executive director will explode.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you plan it accordingly to go with the new redevelopment, you may get a bigger, not only a bigger incentive for development, but also for people to come. So I think it's time.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't do it when it's ready, so you've got the whole thing forward in parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like creating a system that that's in place as opposed to kind of thinking that development's going to come and then everything's going to figure itself out.
It's going to take you, it's going to take time to build up population and density and awareness and a sense of place. And you can encourage that through the investment of money. I hope that would encourage not only developers and development, but also citizens to come see the new Lorton and participate and live in it. So, yeah, exactly.
But I do think we're standing in a place that can be leveraged
Absolutely.
mightily. I mean, this was a big investment, and it was a great investment, and a lot of different members of the community flow through here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
I think this building shows what county staff can. You know, when they have the investment and the opportunity to be creative.
It shows the energies here too.
Yeah, absolutely. Something different.
Yeah, even exercises, going through and saying, you know, and if someone were visiting for a day or a community member for a day, and like creating schedules out of what you could do or what different types of events this could be, and bringing that to the community and just starting to encourage the creative flow even before, you know, some of these things.
It has to be ongoing step.
Exactly. It can't, you know,
Yep.
just one big spurt. You can't expect everyone to come. 'Cause
Exactly.
there will be different people for different times and types of things. So
I think once the new plan and vision looking for Lorton, that's a good time for investment. Send it to get the thing approved. Send it to it.
yeah. Okay. So these are some of the high level next steps, but I'm just going to let Steve come up and go through these. His are in pictures. So thank you.
To be pretty quick. So I just wanted to kind of go over what we've been doing this whole time, and I think you all understand. But what the next step the staff is going to be undertaking is to see how this vision that you've laid out can be meshed with the recommendations that we have from the consultants, and overlay that community vision onto the Lorton South Route 1 suburban center, and create a core area, identify the core area for the suburban center, and then also see how this whole network of these different locations kind of gets what I was saying before, that magnetism from that vision. So we have the 6 activity nodes that staff will be looking at, providing new options for potential land use policy and development potential of Lorton Station, Lorton Marketplace, Gunston Plaza, the Civic Center, which is here, the area surrounding this community center that we're in, and also Richmond Highway Industrial, which you see is number 5, and then Lorton South, which is number 6. And going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, where there's this idea that we're not just looking at replanning these sites as individual sites, but also looking at what's potentially can happen within a quarter mile and up to a half mile between those sites. And when you get closer to that half mile area, that's how those sites are going to hopefully be coming together, meshing together, where you see people moving between those different sites, activity on the streets where, people are biking, walking between these different sites. And these are on each side, as you see at the center, of course, we're looking at mixed use development, improved access between the nodes, highest intensities and densities at each of those within the darkest colors of each of those circles, and also tallest building heights. And then as you move farther away from there, there'll be proper transitions to the existing development in some of the lower density neighborhoods, and still improved access, kind of like what some of the task force members were saying before. You see this green space, these networks of green space that kind of get close to where these activity nodes are, but there really aren't trails and paths for people to walk from their neighborhood to get to these sites. So then again, at that outer half mile, that's where you're going to get to the lowest intensity and density and some of the lowest building heights. So what we'll look at as we're looking at the transect model, we'll be looking at some of the things that Renaissance came to you several months ago and talk to you about. When we're talking about changes, this plan is going to tell people that they have to change what's currently there. It's not going to change what they can do by right if they want to change what's currently there. But it's looking at these objective factors such as age of structure, land to building value, development intensity, current development intensity, which is low for most of the study area, and then public ownership of some of these properties, and how these factors are there's already some underlying potential that change is going to happen because of these factors, because of these longstanding factors in some of these properties. So when we look at the areas outside of what the task force once called opportunity sites, and now we're calling activity nodes, these are some of the things that we're looking at. So as these things spur someone to come about and say, I want to change this property, in order for them to get the most out of that property, the plan is going to say to do those things to get the most out of your property, that you're going to have to that the type of development you introduce to the community is going to have to follow the community's vision. So again, that's what we're going to be considering as we change the comprehensive plan. And what will happen is the recommendations that the task force is seeing tonight coming from the consultants will be packaged in a way where we tie those into where the comprehensive plan could go as far as how much development may happen, the numbers, and where those numbers may take hold, and we'll provide that information to our partner agencies throughout the county. So they'll go to Public Works, the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. They'll go to the Health Department and Neighborhood and Community Development. A lot of the when we started this 2 years ago, when the plan amendment was first authorized, a lot of those same agencies that you heard from who came in and told you about what they look for as the comprehensive plan changes. So they'll be participating in the review with us. And on the right-hand side, you see the land use, that we're looking at land use, transportation and access, environment, public facilities, open space parks, schools. You haven't heard from schools yet, but I'm sure when schools see the numbers, there'll be a lot of information that we receive from them about how their approach to the potential types of changes that could take place in Lorton. So it'll be a well-rounded and highly involved discussions with each of these agencies about what their concerns might be, but also what some of the benefits that may come about from the type of change that are being recommended.
RHA.
Oh, the Regional Housing Authority. So the staff that we work with are in the Department of Housing and Community Development. So here's a look at the plan, at the timeline, and starting this fall again, the information will be provided to our partner agencies, and we'll also be doing some level of analysis as well. And then in the beginning of 2024, that's when we're going to start coming up with draft recommendations for changing the policy. And if any big concerns or any opportunities for making decisions on alternatives to if there's several alternatives that will need your input on, we'll be coming back to check back in with the task force at different times. And then in late winter, we will have the policy after you all have had a glimpse at where the policy is going. We'd like to take it back to the community and just let them know the direction that we're thinking about taking the policy, and hear from them. And then if there are any major changes or any things that we're missing, we'll bring them back to the task force again with the final recommendations. And then in spring of 2024, there should be a staff report that'll be published that gives our analysis and our recommendations for changing the policy and the background behind it. And then in late spring of 2024, there would be public hearings with the planning commission and the board of supervisors. And that's the goal. And with that board of supervisors hearing, that would be the final hearing, the final public hearing with the board of supervisors. There may be multiple hearings that have to take place with either the planning commission or the board of supervisors. But at that final hearing, hopefully late spring of next year or early summer, that's when we would have an adopted plan in place.
Your plan for the public engagement. How do you plan to go about engaging the public?
It would probably be in an open house, just an open house format, or it wouldn't be so much as brainstorming at that point. The brainstorming has had kind of taken place with the visioning, and then we had to open the open house. We've had several times along the way in this process where we've gone back to the community, and they've kind of most of what we hear from the community is they support the direction that the task force steers its study. So at that point in time, usually it's just a matter of taking them through this, taking them through the history of the project and how we got here, saying, okay, this is what we've heard from the task force and the community, that these are the ways that we hope to address it through policy.
So, I'm sorry. So I asked that question because the last, I believe, open house that we had, I'm not sure how many participants we had outside of the task force, but if I'm just visually gauging participation, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked, how do you plan to engage the public?
We haven't really come up with the full scope of how we would do things, but I think there'd probably be some opportunities. There may be a possibility where we could do maybe afternoon sessions, a night session, or even another weekend. It's like I guess through all the public engagement that we've done, and then maybe this, I think meeting people where they are here has been the most interaction we had. When we came to the backpack drive, we talked to more people than we had talked to at the first virtual meeting that we had in 2021. In 2022, last year, we had the virtual meeting, and more people than we had at the open house when we planned it and gave people a certain amount of time. When we came here, we had our posters up. We talked to over 80 people just within a matter of 2 hours. So there are different ways that we can do it. We haven't really decided exactly how to do it, and that's something that we can come back to the task force about too. What are ways that we can really get more people involved than what we've experienced in the past?
Right. So based on your response just now, when you all engage with the public in concert with another activity, you have more participation.
We have more participation. People were walking up.
Maybe you do that in concert with another activity to get, more participation.
That's definitely something we could do. And when we do have the draft policy, one thing that we can do also is make sure that it's published. So at least give people an opportunity to see it. And if they're approaching us at a pop-up or some sort of impromptu event, then maybe they'll already have some questions in mind. Because when you start talking about the policy and what the draft policy is, it's kind of, if you really want to get through all the points, it's kind of hard to do it in a one-on-one or a walk-up type of situation.
So if you go back to the previous slide for just a second, looking at everybody involved there, does you have good conversations with economic development in all of this process to get their input?
Staff actually sat in on the meeting that Lance had with the EDA's representatives, but in the past we haven't sent policy. We haven't sent the full policy to them, but that's something I think it would probably be something they would be interested in seeing based on based on what we've heard. So
Talking about development incentives, we're talking about, investment for the future. I'm thinking beyond the facilities type of food, which a lot of these agencies are trying to provide, giving a sense of here's what's possible for the future of investment.
that's definitely a good suggestion.
We also did specifically talk to them about the industrial area,
Mhm.
further south, specific recommendations about essentially bumping up the FAR to encourage the tech really done it. But I can only guarantee that we increase the level. So, but it's a good point when we do some of the south to the agencies for. They typically don't provide impact analysis. Not exactly what we're doing is being like, oh, good,
Yeah.
But in terms of more specific guidance, of the change of
This is all of the motions we think that occur, they're like
That's a good
separate
point.
from the plan amendment.
Yep.
But it would be things that should happen for the plan amendment or could.
That's a very good idea. It's something you may want to share with us.
So see, I was just following up on Wendy with public engagement
Mhm.
with the South County Federation and have a big meeting.
We'll definitely take it to their meeting as well.
And maybe it'd be a couple.
Well, I would think the chairs should meet with Stephen and staff and kind of go over what they see as a communication plan and what they would see it and the calendar they give us, because that's the first time we've seen it. And then, have groups fold into it. When South County Federation took it upon themselves to have the Zoom meeting on Alpine X, we had 300 people on that Zoom. Gave Nick a heart attack because our Zoom was only set for 100 and later that day. But there are those things that generate that they could generate that kind of push forward. But that's not the only thing to do. It's what are the sequential steps we would be taking. One of them is there a website that speaks specifically to this with these graphics? Just like you say, it's a bit thick to go through. And when you have professionals leading you through it, that helps. Those graphics help. But if you want to go back and look at those graphics, how many times did we ask you guys to go back? Can you go back? Can you go back? Because we synthesize information at different rates. And so the ability to have that out there in advance for the community. I mean, there's all those steps that go into that, but it's just all part of a comprehensive plan for that.
Yeah. And that's pretty much, I think the big takeaway is that unlike how we did everything this year, like we start off in March and there was like a task force meeting every month. In some months we had 2 task force meetings. There won't really be a regular schedule for that because all the different agencies will be catching up with all the stuff that we talked about, catching up with what you learned, catching up with Becca and Lance have left us. But there'll be times when major issues are identified and decision points need to be made, and some of those decision points will be like you asked about the outreach. Some of those decision points will be how do we do this outreach? How do we reach more people than we've reached in the past? And we have representation here with the South County Federation, and we will lean heavily on your recommendation.